Picture it, you're walking down the street and you spot an antique shop that you've never seen before, and you decide to go inside. And because you've never seen a horror movie, you decide to look into the glowing crystal ball. And then suddenly, you find yourself in a fantasy world. Behind you is an egg, and in front of you, the dragon crystal. And welcome to Goldfish on Games. The Dragon Crystal was developed by Sega R&D 2 and was originally released in 1990 in Japan on the Game Gear, with other regions coming out soon after. A port to the Master System came out a year later, so amazingly this was a Game Gear first title, and if you've not seen the Master System version before, that might be due to the fact it only came out in PAL regions. Inside we get the regular carts, with the Game Gear getting the far more interesting looking one, and I'm still a big fan of the little clamshells that we got with this generation of handhelds. The manuals go over the basic story, and then outside of the obvious differences with the controls, they are mostly the same. But it is worth a read as it does give you some useful hints and tips, as well as letting you know about a very useful ability that would be difficult to stumble upon. Both versions start with a short and unique intro sequence, which includes having different music. And this is a trend that continues into the game, where we can clearly see these are the same game even if they do look slightly different. So as we go through the rest of the video, I will be jumping between the two versions to really show them off. Now graphically, this game isn't going to win any awards, as the levels, well, they're made up of only a small number of tiles, but it does make it very clear which areas you have explored. Thankfully though, there isn't just this single set, as it will change up as we progress through the game, and each version having a completely different set, and they do get a little bit weird in places. But I have to say, I do think I like the Game Gear graphics a little bit more. And while the graphics might be simple, the gameplay isn't, as there's a lot to unpack for an 8-bit console game here. We are obviously the hero in the middle of the screen. That thing following us? That's an egg. And what you'll mostly do is walk around the map, slowly revealing it from the fog, because we are looking for the warp panel that will take us down to the next floor, of which there are 30 in total for you to traverse, and all of which are filled with enemies that you'll need to fight. And while this might seem like it's all happening in real time, it's technically turn-based, and this becomes more apparent when you attack an enemy, which is done by walking into them. But you can just not move, and they will also not move or attack. So all actions are based on you doing an action first. And the game will remind you of this if you hang around too long with a message at the bottom of the screen. And if you just want to burn up a turn, you can just tap button 2. As normally this would pick up items on the floor, but it will also act as an empty turn. It also has another ability, because if at any point you think you're completely stuck and you can't find the warp panel, or you're in a room that you can't get out, then there might be a hidden path, and you can tap button 2 a number of times against the wall and it might just vanish and allow you to move on. As you're walking around, you could try to avoid combat and just go straight for the warp. That is, if you can find it quickly enough. But this isn't recommended for a few reasons, as each time you play the game you'll get a completely new set of levels, so you'll have no idea where the exit is. This being an RPG, you will gain experience by defeating the various monsters, which will lead you to leveling up, which will give you the expected health increases as well as additional strength, all of which will be needed when you get to the later levels. if you get to the later levels. But this isn't the only way to get stronger, as there are a range of items for you to collect, such as a number of classes of swords and armors to pick up, with the colour of the sword and the graphics of the armour showing you which class you're currently using. And if you make it further and further down the floors, you might find some enemies that seem almost impossible to kill, no matter how strong your sword is, and it will turn out that you might need to use the right one to defeat them. And for the most part, the really difficult baddies will have a blue sword that will pair up to take them out quickly. But that will take some trial and error on your part to work out which one works best with each baddie. The other colours of swords, well, they also indicate how they work. Like the purple ones tend to have a trade-off for much stronger power. Now this is similar with the armour, as there are some that will do much better against some enemies, or even negate some of their more nasty abilities, so collecting every sword and armour that you find on the floor is important. But you also have to be careful, as some of these might be cursed, and that will set their rating to 0 and you won't be able to switch them out. Your current attack and defense numbers are shown in this text-heavy menu. But one of the main numbers that you'll be looking at when bringing this up is the food, as it plays a very important role. As with it, you will be able to heal after a number of turns, at the expense of it being consumed. But with there being an upper max, you will have to be careful about grabbing those loaves and floor meats because you don't want to waste them. And as we can see from the rest of this menu, there is a lot more to talk about, as we also have scrolls, also known as books, rods, potions, and rings, that initially when you collect them are given names that hide what they are. And the only way to work out what they do is to either use them or throw them. As those colour names, they are also randomised for every game. But once you've interacted with them once, then they'll show what their true name is from now on. Scrolls tend to help you in some way, so they might reveal the map for the current floor, or change the currently held weapon to one of the fabled blue class. The more important scroll though, is the one that will remove curses, so try to keep that one on you at all times. Rods are mostly about doing damage to the enemies. But you need to be careful, as there is one that will make you lose a level, so it's typically a good idea to try out every item you can find on the earlier floors so it has less of an impact. Potions are the regular curatives that you might expect with restoring health, but they might also give you permanent buffs to your attack and dodging abilities. And finally, there are rings. These are passive buffs for the most part, and you can just wear just one. But they can also, like swords and armour, be cursed. But even with that, you will want to try out every single one you find, because you might find one that gives you more strength, or make your food last longer, so they are really important. As the game pretty much randomizes everything, you'll never really know if you'll find all of the different items in the game, as in one of my attempts I didn't find better armour in the first 8 floors. And you might think that this is what all the gold is for, that you might be able to buy better items, but there is no shop in this game. There is no way to buy or sell. Gold is purely used when you die. As when you go up against something that you can't beat, you'll have to pay to return to the action, and that amount goes up with each death as well as which floor you're on. So you might want to attack some enemies from afar, which is where the throw ability comes in, as just about every item can be thrown, which is great for swords as they can damage the enemies, but can also be useful for the books and potions, as the ones with negative abilities will affect the baddies. As trying to attack some enemies from a distance is important, as some of the baddies' attacks can apply statuses to you, Now this might range from the annoying, like randomizing your controls or fogging up the map again, to absolute evil, like destroying your weapons and armor by rusting them. But there's also ones that might make you lose a level, or permanently reduce your strength. And there is quite the motley crew of enemies to deal with. Some are visually just palette swaps of each other, but they might have vastly different strengths and abilities. Thankfully, the enemies aren't randomized in each game, so you can learn all about them and then remember it for next time. And the same types of enemies will show up on the same floors each time you play as well. If you've never played this game, but it somehow feels a bit familiar, then you might have played Fatal Labyrinth, a game also made by Sega, but was released for their Mega Drive and it's set inside a castle. It has a similar premise with the randomly generated levels, and it even shares some graphics. The two titles even came out within months of each other, so I do wonder if they might have started off as the same title and then diverged at some point. But it's hard to say, and I've not put as much time into Fatal Labyrinth as I have into Dragon Crystal, so I can't go too much in depth with it. Annoyingly, there is no save option within the game, or even a password system, and considering it could take you a few hours to finish, even if you know what you're doing, that's not great. So you better give yourself a good amount of time to play, or just leave the console on overnight. But that is if you manage to make it that far into the game, because it is quite difficult on your first few runs. Particularly due to the random nature of the levels, and the items, so you might just have a bad run and end up with the worst weapons for the enemies that you're facing. So I will say, using an emulator and having save states is very handy. And it's not like this game is particularly easy to save scum, as you will still have to learn about all the various monsters and weapons and learn what's best to use. Or you can use a guide. Now let's talk about that elephant-sized egg that's in the room, as it will follow you around, but it will eventually hatch into a dragon. And then it will keep growing. Now this is all linked to your experience level, which makes it a little surprising to find out that this has absolutely no impact on the gameplay. You can't use the dragon, and it doesn't have any passive abilities. This appears to be a completely cosmetic thing. Even with that oddity, this is a lovely game, and it could be seen as an early example of what we tend to dub these days roguelites, with you carrying nothing between each run apart from your own learned experiences. And obviously we get the randomized nature of the game, which feels pretty much on brand. And if you want to check this out, well, the only place this got a re-release was on the 3DS Virtual Console, which you can no longer access. The closest you can get to it right now would be Fatal Labyrinth, which is on Steam. I do wish that Sega would give the Game Gear and Master System as much love as they do the Mega Drive. I'd love to buy a proper collection with all the really great Master System and Game Gear titles on it. All that's left to do now is to deal with the dragons that live on floor 30 and try and find the crystal that will take me back home. So until next time, I was the Goldfish. That was a reminder that antique stores can lead to interesting things, and this was Goldfish on Games. Thanks for watching. I'm a big fan of the Sega 8-bit machines, and I've done a number of game reviews in the past, with more to come in the future, I'm sure. So if that sounds good to you, then you can check out some of the videos on the screen right now, or you can leave a like or even subscribe. I swear I won't randomize the buttons.